Robin Thompson. I am a fundraising consultant, and I help nonprofits raise more money and coach people on how to raise more money during this time of COVID. And I started these webinars about 8 weeks ago, and I just kept hearing nonprofits who were receiving a lot of information that just really wasn't accurate. And what it was causing was this panic. And I thought if I could get some experts to let me interview them and talk about what was going on out there, that then it would help all of us and give all of us a little bit of hope. So I knew one of the things that I have heard you all say is, what's happening across the country? Because if you're like me, I'm in my little world here, and where I used to be in coffee shops and restaurants and talking to people, I don't get that opportunity anymore. So I really wonder what's going on out there in the rest of the world. That's why I knew Ben Miller would be the perfect person to have come in this morning and talk a little bit about trends. He's the Chief Analytic Officer for DonorTrends, a division of Every Action. He's instrumental in analyzing the data that's received from over 20,000 nonprofit organizations for the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. That's how I met Ben, was at the Association of Fundraising Professionals. I was invited to a core group meeting of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And so if you haven't heard about that, he'll tell you a little bit about that. But what he's very good at is making it understandable for all of us. He has degrees in mathematics and system engineering to advance marketing in the nonprofit industry. But here's the deal with Ben. He's also raised hundreds of millions of dollars from millions of donors over his career. He also serves on the Research Council for the Association of Fundraising Professionals and is a member of the steering committee for the Growth in Giving Initiative. So Ben, thank you so much. I know that you just squeezed this in this morning, and so we just so much appreciate you being here. So why don't we start out just a little with you just giving 15 or 20 minutes and telling us a little bit about trends and what you see happening, and then we'll ask you some questions about it.
That sounds great. Thank you, Robin. And hello, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to my house. We just like everyone else, working from home, got some exercise equipment in the back here, but do the best we can to present the information I have. So, as Robin mentioned, I am on the Growth in Giving Fundraising Effectiveness Project, and if you're not AFP members, or even if you are or are not, you still have access to these free tools and resources that they provide, and it is a wonderful collaborative of organizations. So let me share my screen, and we'll jump right into this is the Fundraising Effectiveness Project group of nonprofit sector groups that are endorsing the project. It was founded by the AFP and the Urban Institute, and it is a wonderful collaborative. I'd say there's probably 35 volunteers that help this to happen. And we, as Robin mentioned, we have over 20,000 organizations data, and the data providers, Bloomerang, DonorPerfect, and Neon One, provide the data anonymously, and the data is then analyzed by me. I'm actually in the middle of doing Q1 right now for 2020, and we're eager to find out what's going on, especially with the pandemic, trying to dig a little deeper this time, go week by week and see if we can't find trends, some of which we'll be talking about today. But what I do have here is the Q4 of 2019, so that can sort of start as a benchmark of where we were prior to this new craziness that's going on. And also the data reporting is provided by Data Lake and my company, DonorTrends, which is now a division of Every Action. And so let's just jump right into what happened at the end of last year. What were we facing prior to this pandemic? And what we saw was the donations went down 1.4%. Now, if you adjust for inflation, it goes down even further to nearly 4 percentage points. But 1.5% went down by the end of the year. And this was a change. We were rising prior to this in 2018. And this was very small change in average donation. You can see it's nearly the same. It's 15.15% change. So it's basically flat. The average gift did not change, which means that it really came from the donors. We've lost more donors. We lost 3% of donors giving from 18 to 19, and this is a trend that has been coming for many years now, and really led by the new donors, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. The overall donor retention, I'm sure everyone knows how important it is to retain your donors. But that overall donor retention is just 40, not even half of the people stay. So 45%, and that's been declining over the last decade. We used to be closer to 50%. Still not really awesome, but 45% is less, and that's not a good trend, and we can't sustain that. My own personal opinion on the matter is that there are more and more nonprofits every single year, more than 1 million, and the competition for the dollar is getting ever more fierce. And combine that with the actual the donor population, which I consider to be more 50 and above, that the younger people don't donate as much until you really get past that 50-year mark, maybe 45, maybe 55. But that's where really most of the donations come from. When you're younger, you might give a smaller donation, but the real chunk of the donations come from there. And we're at the end of the baby boomers, right? So the population, if you've ever looked at the curve, it shrinks and it's going back out, so it will come back in many years. So what I'm trying to get at is we have fewer people in that donor pool, and we have more organizations to donate to. And so that's my own personal hypothesis of what's going on and why we're seeing such decline in donor participation. And so here I want to show you the three retention rates that are important to measure. So new donor retention for the sector was 20%, meaning just 1 out of 5 new donors gave again the second year. So just think about that, all the money it takes to get a new donor into the door, right? And then just 1 out of 5 of them stay. But that's what that is across the sector. And then repeat donor retention. Now those are people that are into the organization. 61%, that's better. 6 out of 10 are retaining. And then the recapture rate of 4%, just 4% are coming back. So of course it's less expensive to recapture a donor, but it's a lot harder. So those numbers are across the sector. And then here's where the real trouble is new donor acquisition. It's been going down for a couple different years now. Maybe I think it's 3 or 4, but a 5 percentage point decline. If you think about that, that's really big, meaning that the number of new donors coming in the door is continuing to shrink. And what I've studied across those 20,000 organizations is that on average, for every 1 reactivated donor, you need 4 new donors to just maintain your file size. So if this number is shrinking, that's why we are declining. And then after that, when you retain them, that retention is declining by 6%. So not only are we getting less in the door, but then we're retaining less of them. So that is spelling a lot of trouble, and maybe many of you are experiencing this now, but it's a real problem and the canary in the coal mine. So this is not going to impact today's fundraising as much as it will tomorrow's. So let's look at the repeat retain. And I don't mean to say the sky is falling. I just trying to show what's going on. We have seen a lot of big donors, help carry the load, and so you're seeing more and more donations coming from fewer people. So here we're showing the repeat donor retention, which declined 2%. Not quite as bad as the new donors, but it did decline. And hey, we saw an increase in lapsed reactivation. So that's a good 3.8%. All right, so I want to put this in perspective. This is one of my favorite graphics. It's the leaky bucket. And I think it really, what I'm using is the information from that 20,000 organizations. And I've whittled it down so it's sort of bite-sized, and it's not percentages, but people. So if you're thinking about the entirety as 1,000 people, and then I'm going to apply the percentages to those 1,000 people. So remember we had 45% retention, so that meant 451 out of 1,000 people retained, okay, in 2019. So what happened? That means that we had 549 people leave. They didn't give, right? So they go into this lapsing pool. And then, so how did we replenish that? With new donor acquisition, and we had 373 new donors come in. Now, I remind you that that was, I think, 6 percentage points below where it was the prior year. And then we had 146. That's not quite that 4-to-1 ratio there. So we had less new donors coming in and more lapse reactivation. That was increased. That's where we had that increase. And then, so here's how that all plays together, right? 373 plus 146 is 519. But we lost 549. So the gain-loss ratio is minus 3%. And if you recall, that's what we said. We lost 3%. We have 3% less donors. So that helps to try to put it in perspective that, you know, a big part of that loss is where the new donors come. So the question is, what can you do? There's only two ways to increase. You can either add more water, right? You can either put new donors in or reactivate old donors, right? Or you can decrease the size of the holes, right? So you retain more people. Those are the only two ways that you change that equation. And so I like that graphic because it really helps to illustrate that point. But so here I wanted to show the trend for the last 5 years and what that trend is spelling. And I mentioned it earlier that we're basically seeing, you know, after increases in the revenue, donors and dollars. So 13 and 14 aren't quite right because our FY report only does a 5-year history. So this huge jump is not really accurate. But from 15 to 16 to 17, you see the revenue, which is that dark blue, going up. And then you see the donors basically stay flat. And if you take those two trend lines, what you see is that the donors are not going to be increasing the same way the revenue, and that can't sustain, right? But that's what we're seeing across the sector, is that we are seeing more revenue coming from fewer donors. So what does this mean to me? It means that we need to, A, be very, very close to our major donors. We need to understand and connect and and steward them and make sure that they're part of the organization's mission and are committed and and collaborative and not seen, and so therefore they'll maintain that relationship. But also broaden the base. Right? It's risky to have so much money coming from 1 or 2 donors. So the more small donations you can get also help. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Robin. But that's the state of what was going on through 2019.
Great. Oh, wow. So it's like I'm sitting here shaking my head like, oh no. We had one little good piece of data in there. Okay, so that's what happened through the end of December 2019. And I know you said you have not finished the first quarter report, but as you've started working on it, are you seeing some kind of trends here during the COVID? And can you talk any about what you're seeing right now and you think might happen?
Certainly. And so at the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, we come at this with a collaborative approach. And one of the things we're trying to do right now is ensure that our data is representative, so that we're going through a couple iterations of statistical sampling of the data that we have. There's also been other reports out there, so I can sort of confirm what I'm seeing with what I've read elsewhere. But I caveat it that we're still in the middle of making this happen. So what I saw was a decline in the middle of March, with donations. I've seen that corroborated in other reports. I did notice a pretty good uptick in the last week of March, so that donations did go up. And in other reports I've read, I've seen, certain sectors take really big hits. Arts, museums, are taking pretty big hits, and you see rises in the human services, which makes sense, right? You see them increasing, education taking a hit, and so the things that you would think, the people that are responding to the pandemic, they're seeing rises. Everyone sort of saw a decline like when we were all like, what's going on in the middle of March? And none of us, and I think we're still kind of in that mode as a country, as a world. What is going to happen? We don't know, but I think we're kind of getting used to that uncertainty and feeling a little bit more comfortable. And the donations are reflecting that. The donations are going up, mail's going up in the recent months, and recent weeks. And so it looks as though, my hunch is that they're just like the small businesses out there. There's going to be small organizations that can't survive this. But as a whole, I did some research on the nonprofit sector across the Great Recession, and some good news is that the nonprofit sector is resilient, and that it did not take as big of a hit as the economy did during the Great Recession. It only declined 8%, where the economy declined 45%. People still donate during this time, so it does not mean that we are doomed for failure. And I just think that as we all try to figure this out, donations, of course, went down, right? When we were all saying, oh, people were probably hiding money in their mattresses. So who knows? But I hope that, so that's what I'm seeing so far in the first quarter.
And so that goes right along with the question Colleen asked about, are you seeing a trend of less nonprofits? And so as you were seeing that trend, those trends through the end of last year, could you tell were there less nonprofit organizations, or does your data tell that?
Unfortunately, our data does not, because we don't know the denominator, how many nonprofits there are. We only are able to look at the nonprofits that we have within the data set. But the IRS, there is reporting out there from how many filings there are with the IRS. I just don't have that at my fingertips.
And so then Diana asked, Ben, do you know if the under 50 crowd will eventually have the philanthropic mindset of the baby boomers? So if we steward those relationships now, would they have the capacity to reach the same levels of engagement, not necessarily dollars?
I would say absolutely yes. I mean, I think we're all people, and we all have that same feeling. We all want to do good, and so I think it's just a matter of where you are in your life. I'm 42, and I have 3 children, and we're not where we will be in 15 years from now. We'll have more expendable money and disposable money, income, I guess, or if you will. Right now, feeding 3 children and weathering all this, it's just we're in a different lifestyle. And certainly when I was younger, I just don't think I was around. I was thinking much about it, and so I think it's just the natural progression of people. So I do definitely think that they'll have the same mindset as the baby boomers.
And one of the things that you said was 1 out of 5 new donors stay. And again, I don't know whether your data can tell. I mean, like, why do only 1 out of 5 stay? What can we do, or what do you have any ideas there?
I've always thought it had something to do with guilt. How like some people feel guilty and give out of that feeling, and that never is sustainable, right? I don't think you can retain someone. No one wants to continually feel guilty and donate in that way, right? I think that might have something to do with it. Social pressure, perhaps even. You go to an event for and you're having dinner and it's a gala or something, and you donate because that's what you need to do, but then you're not really into the mission, or you're not really into the so I think it has something to do with all of that. It's hard to convince someone to join you to once, let alone twice, to join you in doing good for the country. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think I see that a lot when we analyze events, particularly peer-to-peer events are some of the toughest, because you give to something because your friend said, oh, come on, join me in that race, join me in that whatever. And then events in general, people like say, okay, let's go, I'll go to the gala. Come on, I bought a table, you go with me. And then they feel that guilt you're talking about,
Yep.
and they give money. And then we as nonprofits continue to try to develop them into long-term donors, and it just doesn't happen. So I think you're probably right that that's one of the things that happens. And I wonder if we'll see this here during the pandemic, because there are people who are giving to those social service organizations because they don't want to see people hungry. They don't want to see people lose their houses or be kicked out of their rentals. And so they're giving money to those because they feel the need right now, like a major disaster, hurricane, tornado, whatever, but retaining them may not be sustainable either.
So you bring up a good point that I think be good for everyone on the webinar. So I did some disaster analysis back with Katrina, and one of the things that was really interesting, and you can all use this, you know, so I work with predictive models, and I try to help. Okay, what does the data tell me about who's willing to give? But one nugget of information that came from that analysis was that during Katrina, donations that had change, in other words, they gave $20.18, and there were people that did this, were really more likely to donate again. And so the reason it makes sense is that if someone's giving you 18 cents, they're really thinking about their donation, right? This is what I can afford. This is, you know, it's not just $25 or that blanket 10, you know, they're really thinking about it. So if you can apply this at your own organization, so someone who's giving you some sort of unique donation, it's not coming out of some guilt or I asked them for 35, they gave me 35, you know, but they actually are thinking about it. That would indicate that they have some, compatibility with your mission. So.
Wow, very interesting. And so when you looked at that data also, for instance, with Katrina or some kind of natural disaster, did you see giving going up to other organizations too, besides those social service organizations that were directly giving money to something related to Katrina?
So back when I was doing the analysis for Katrina, I was with a specific organization, and I didn't have the big data set that I have now, which is nice. But I have recently, we had those hurricanes like 3 years ago where, there were certain like Houston, for example, Houston-related organizations got a lot of money because they were in a lot of trouble. I did not see the rising tide lift all boats there. So only the ones that were directly helping, did see that increase.
Interesting, yeah, and I mean that's what we would think would happen, but what we would also hope is that it would open the heart of people to other organizations too, because they want to do something to help. So are there any techniques that you have seen or heard about for retaining donors? Because as we looked at what you were talking about, that retention is scary. I mean, every time that I see you do this for like the last, 5-6 years at the Association of Fundraising Professionals, that number just keeps going down as to our retention rate. And I get really concerned about that. And so, any ideas that you can give us for that retention?
Well, I'll say this. So we work with European organizations as well, and Canadian, and in both cases they have a much different way of fundraising, in that they really go after sustainers, monthly donations. In Europe, for example, they do a lot of face-to-face canvassing and try to get people to donate on a monthly basis. And the majority of fundraising there and in Canada is coming from these recurring donations. People sign up for these EFTs, and their retention numbers are incredible. So they like, whereas we're showing 20% first year, they're well above 40. And for their multi-years, like 80%, 90. So like they're able to. And in the U.S., it's just, we don't do that. We don't do the canvassing. most of the recurring or sustaining revenue that comes here is a small portion, unless you're like a child sponsorship organization. And I think the more that we can utilize that technique, the better we will be at retaining our donors.
And so, just to clarify, I mean, they're asking for, you know, like a monthly, and we'll call it a membership, you know, like, I don't know if Nicola's on the call, but Betty Ford Alpine Gardens has a membership for the Alpine Gardens every year. Or we just get them to give monthly and just set up a recurring donation, which we know what happens when they set up a recurring donation. They kind of get used to it and they kind of forget about it and they just let it roll. And so is that what you're talking about, memberships and then monthly donations?
Yes, both of those. Yeah, both of those would work. I mean, and there's other ways to do that as well. You know, like the child sponsorship. You know, where you're like you could do that a different way as well. But you're sponsoring a child, so you like are connected. There's a reason why you're continuing to give. You know, and so there's a lot of different ways to sort of go about that. But that recurring donation, just as you said, so if you get that first feeling of guilt, you know, and they make that act, but that act is a recurring act, you know, it's a lot easier to keep it. You know, I don't hate to, you don't want to play on people's guilt, right? But just that is once they've made that first initial decision, if it's recurring, it's just a lot easier to keep them back, keep them.
Very interesting, because you know, a lot of times, you know, what we call a test gift, you know, the first gift that a donor gives a lot of times is a smaller gift because they want to see, is the nonprofit going to use it the way that I would have intended for that to be used? Do I feel like that, you know, the leadership, the board, whatever. But if we really start focusing on those monthly donations as opposed to that one big donation, you know, we've start, you know, reeling them in. So yeah, so that's great. Okay, so a couple of different questions I'll put in here together. So fundraising effectiveness project, you talked a little bit about that. You mentioned growth in giving, and then there's donor trends. So kind of break that down for us and tell us what the FEP is, Fundraising Effectiveness Project, what growth in giving is, and then what donor trends does and how all that interplays.
Sure. So the Fundraising Effectiveness Project was started by the AFP and the Urban Institute and a man named Bill Levis. You probably haven't heard of him, but he is a wonderful man, has contributed a lot to the nonprofit sector. He also recruited me into this as well. And he is a master of getting people to collaborate and, you know, volunteer. So that is why there are 35 volunteers. We really don't have a big budget. And, you know, it's a group of people who want to do good. And we all come together. The data providers provide the data. We meet, you know, on a biweekly basis, and it's all now underneath the AFP's umbrella. And you know, we've a number of different practitioners, you know, software providers, consultants, all as part of this effort. And we are able to produce these regular reports to show what's going on in the sector. And then DonorTrends, which is the company that is my company that we started years ago to help nonprofits of any size get state-of-the-art technology. So I came from the math background, and what we were trying to do was equip data science, not just to the large organizations who can afford statisticians, but rather provide an application that could make it easy for anyone to use. And so we use predictive models and reports, and our main focus is to provide actionable intelligence, right? And when you find, like, every report we do has a point to it. There's not analysis paralysis. We do not want you to see a number that you can't act upon. And we use predictive modeling to help optimize your fundraising strategy. So when I came across the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, the data analytics that I was doing was able to sort of fit in to help produce these reports for the Fundraising Effectiveness Project.
And where does growth in giving fit in all that?
It's an interesting question. They changed the name a while back because they wanted to go out and try to get foundation money, and they didn't think foundations would want to fund something called fundraising effectiveness. And so they got rid of the name and put it, so it's not really different. They're really the same. The Growth in Giving is the Fundraising Effectiveness Project.
And so one of the things, some of the nonprofits that are on the call today are smaller nonprofits. And for the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, you need to have at least, is it 5 years of data, and preferably more than that. And then a certain number of donors. And some of them don't have that. But do you think that the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, is there a way that that might be able to help them?
Yes. So, and we have clients that only have like, 100 donors, not a lot of data, with DonorTrends. So it's with DonorTrends or with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. They have a fitness test out there that's free for anyone to use. But the bottom line is, even if you're very new and starting with a very small organization, numbers still help, and and reporting still helps, and metrics still help. So it gives you an advantage to run your retention, even if you have a few donors. The more you get, the better it will be. The more you can count on it. So if you only have 100 donors, for example, or 20 donors, it's really hard to determine what your retention would be, because one person makes the percentage change a lot, right? But if you have 20,000, that it becomes a little bit more predictable. So, but still, operating in the dark, any little bit of light helps, right? So it doesn't matter how big you are, these tools can help you.
Great. And just to remind people, the Fundraising Effectiveness Project is a free tool on the Association of Fundraising Professionals website, and you don't have to be a member of AFP. And I've run that for a number of my clients, and it's very interesting, the data that comes out of that we're able to say, okay, so what's happened in the past? Where do we see our gaps? Where do we see our strengths? And then what can we do to capitalize on all of that and make a huge difference? And it has for those nonprofits. And so I would highly suggest, even if you're a small nonprofit and you don't have a lot of donors, that you go take a look at it and just play around with it. Just plug your data in. It's very well done. Bill Levitz, how old is he? Is he like 90? Is he that old?
He's approaching, I think he's 88.
Yeah.
He's approaching 90, yep.
This man is phenomenal. And I got connected to him through a presentation that he did. And, he is just the sweetest, nicest man. And he's a true collaborator. Okay, so one of the things that you talked about, Ben, was you talked about predictability. And so I know, like, I can't think of the name of the company now, but some of Razor's Edge, they, or Blackbaud, they would say, we can predict, do predictive modeling for your ideal donor or whatever. Donor Perfect says that. And so what you're talking about, that same thing about taking their database and predicting how much will these donors give? Or is it predicting, like, here is an ideal donor avatar, let's call it. And this ideal donor avatar, if we go out there into the big world and find those same kind of donors, then you can increase your acquisition. So tell us a little bit about what that predictability is.
Good question. So we do not, the second part of what you said was sort of like what they call a lookalike model. And I have not found those to be very successful. We do not predict that. We stick with the organization's data only. We don't want to invade anyone's privacy and try and bring in additional information. We want to see how a donor acts within that organization. And what we do is we have 10 predictive models for every stage of the donor life cycle. So, whether they're new, having given one gift, they have to have at least given one gift, right? Whether they're new, who's going to convert, when they're existing, who's going to retain, and we prioritize. It's not really that we're saying this. We do have an optimized ask where we can determine, what amount to ask them, but the predictive models really just sort donors like best to worst. Who's most likely to donate, who's least likely, and who's most likely to become a recurring member, donate, or sustainer, or who's least likely. Who's most likely to upgrade, who's least likely. And then, up to play giving as well. So it goes all the way through the life cycle at every stage, trying to predict what next action they'll do.
And so the modeling that you do, and it might be kind of like the secret sauce here. So it's looking at that particular donor and looking at their history within your organization, and then it's making the prediction based on that?
Yes, that is exactly right.
And so when we look at that predictive modeling, and we're looking at, a smaller database. And so let's say you run that through and you say, oh, okay, this person gave for the past 3 years. And then you would say, okay, this is somebody you need to be talking to about planned giving, or you need to be talking to them, right? I mean, is that how you do? Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Good. So, I keep saying that everything, has gone out the window since COVID. I keep saying it's BC before COVID and AC after COVID. And so we're still in that middle piece of knowing what's going to happen. But are there ways that you're going to modify or change that modeling as you look at this period of time during COVID? How are you going to do that? What are you going to do differently, or anything?
So we routinely, look at the data, and we use genetic modeling as well as machine learning, and let the data sort of predict, and tell us what to predict. The funny thing is that it seems that though, no matter what's going on, donors still are donors, and they still act the way that they act. And so the models are surprisingly resilient, and even it's like that rising tide in all boats, right? So even though everyone might be giving more, the people who are likely to give more are still the people that are likely to give more, and the people that are likely to give less are still the people that are likely to give less. So the target might change, like the response rate might go up, but the people go up with it and down with it, right? And the amount people give go up, but people who are likely to give more, and it shifts together, if you will.
Interesting, because you say that, and I'm working with an organization where we ask for a 20% increase in their gift over the last year. And it's very interesting because the lower level gifts did it. The higher level gifts didn't do it. So almost no one that was one of the, let's say, 5,000 and above, it's a small nonprofit. Almost none of them increased their gift over the year before. And, I thought, that's an interesting mindset. And so it goes into what you just said, when they're going to give, okay, in my mind, I give $5,000 to that organization every year, and that's what I'm going to give. I don't care what you say. I don't care if you say you need more for something in particular.
Right.
I'm still going to give you $5,000. And
right.
So that behavior you're talking about stays the same. And I tell people that even during the pandemic here, that people who are philanthropic givers will still be philanthropic regardless of what's going on, if they're able to. I mean, sometimes what we see happen, of course, in times like right now, is that they're worried about the financial stock market. They're worried about, illness, healthcare, whatever, and their gift may go down, which I wonder if you'll see that in your data when you look back at it. But then what I've seen in the past, like after 2008, after 9/11, what happened was then they gave more the next year. So again, it all evened out in the long run. So what might you suggest as, you've looked at data from the past and from catastrophes and things like that. And so what would you suggest for the nonprofits that are on the call today as to what we can do? What might you suggest?
I think it's important to stay the course. I think that it's easy for us to think, well, I can't ask for people to donate right now. People are having hardships, but we're all having hardships, right? Even the nonprofits. And so even if you're not directly servicing the pandemic, you're impacted by it, and people can understand that you're impacted by it. And if they are into your cause, they will donate, and they have the means to do it, right? If they have the means and so I don't think it's wise to not ask, but I also think it's unwise to ask without having good messaging. Just being blind to everything and saying, hey, donate to us, the same way you've always asked is probably not the best strategy. But even acquiring new donors, which I imagine is got to be really, really tough at the moment, it still has to be done. And so try to balance it all as best you can. Have an investment amount that you're willing to invest to get new donors and reactivate old ones, and then stick to that investment. And I like to put things in Excel and budget it, and here's how much I can risk losing on wasted acquisition, which might very well happen because no one wants to give to a new organization, whatever. But you still got to try and just set a limit, and then and then that way you won't go overboard, and make sure that you can stay solvent and can serve the purpose that you're there, your mission, serve your mission. So that would be my advice.
And I think that's great advice, because I am working with some newer nonprofits that don't have a very big donor list. And so, I said last week in the call with Roger Corville, when we were talking about telling your story virtually, let's say you see somebody in an event and they introduce you to somebody else. Well, it's much easier to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I saw you at that event. It was great to meet you. Well, think about now that you're trying to acquire donors. What do? Do you pick up the phone and call them, and they're not going to answer your call? Hey, let's have a Zoom call. Let's talk on FaceTime. They don't know you. They're not going to do that. So that's pretty much what I'm advising nonprofits. Don't stop trying. So let's send out a letter introducing who you are and what you're doing during this time as you have just started the nonprofit. Or if it's a newer nonprofit, tell what programs you're doing right now. Tell the things that are happening, and you can put a soft ask in there. People that know me know that I don't like to let an ask go to waste. And so that you need to put a soft ask in there that, when you consider your giving, please consider us. I mean, just very soft. And so that people say, oh, wow, they're doing something great here. I'll send them a small gift. And during this time, I know I have done that. I think Giving Tuesday was just brilliant for nonprofits. And I really pushed them to do something for Giving Tuesday. I know there were some consultants that said, oh, if you're not a social service organization, don't do anything on Giving Tuesday. But it gave all of us the opportunity to lay something out there in front of people and say, hey, it's Giving Tuesday, and please consider us during your giving on Giving Tuesday. So I thought that was brilliant. I was so glad that they did that.
Me too.
Yeah. So now we have to figure out, okay, so, what's next, right? Because we don't know how much longer this is going to last. I'm here in Vail, Colorado. We were one of the first counties to be locked down. We had more cases per capita in the country per this county. And so we have started slowly opening back up. But as we continue every day, the headlines in the newspaper, another event canceled, another event canceled. And here locally, during the summer, we had symphony symphony orchestras that were at the amphitheater, and we would go and we would see all these people, and we would meet people, and we don't have that opportunity now. The Jazz, Vel Jazz just canceled their summer. It was in this morning's paper. So now it's like, okay, so now what do we do? How do we do that acquisition?
It's such a challenge, but it's got to be done. So time to be innovative, right? Necessity is the mother of all invention, right?
It is. And I have said, okay, so let's look at the silver lining. And again, people who know me know that I have my rose-colored glasses on. But when people come here during the summer and there is an event every single night of the summer, well, now there's not. So now when people come here, providing we do open up so that people that are
Right.
more than 10 miles away can come here, that there are opportunities. And so no matter where these people are throughout the country that are on the call, I think we can, say, okay, so what can we do given this situation? And one of the things that, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but next week our call is on events. And we're going to do something a little different. Instead of having a webinar format like this, we're going to do a meeting format in Zoom. So that means that everybody will get to participate. And so what we have is we have 6 different people who have either had to cancel their event, postpone their event, or reimagine their event. And so we have them, and they're going to talk for like 5 minutes each, and they're going to say, these were the considerations, this is what we did, and this was the result, if it's happened or if it's in the future. And then we're going to put people in breakout rooms and have all of the breakout rooms talk about, okay, from what you just heard, what ideas do you have? What ideas have you seen? And then we'll bring everybody back together again and have the facilitator of each of those breakout rooms say, these are some ideas. So we think it'll give some hope to what can we do differently than the events that we would have normally done during the summer. And so, because that, I think when we talk about that acquisition, that is one of the big ways that we acquire new donors, or at least we get exposure, even though, like you said, a lot of times we don't see the future of those particular donors, but there are some that will see our advertisement for our event. So we're trying our best to, figure out, and somebody said to me the other day, who moved my cheese? Remember that book? So anyway, okay, we're coming to the end here. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. And while you're doing that, let me ask you, Ben, if you were to wave your magic wand and you could bestow anything on the nonprofits that are on this call, what might you do with that magic wand? What would it result in?
It's a very good question, and I also I appreciate that next week A sounds like a really good format, and B will be more uplifting. And I apologize for the doom and gloom that I may have brought today. But as far as what I might say to everyone is, that try your best, to stay solvent, right? At the very least, right? Because people who do support you and do, want you to succeed will be there for you, and maybe you personally know that 1 or 2 people that can help you stay solvent. If you're at that point of really, being close to shutting down. For those of you that are fortunate that are not, continually connect with your donors. Now is a great time to connect with them. People are hungry to learn about anything other than the coronavirus. I mean, so, it's a great time to try to engage with them in different and unique ways. So I would say just try that.
And I think that's great advice. And it goes back to the question of, will we see less nonprofits? I mean, I do think there will be some nonprofits that can't make it through this. And, and my theory is that, you know, they were probably on shaky ground even before the coronavirus, and they were just one disaster away from not being able to survive. But other nonprofits I've worked with, Ben, I mean, they have reimagined what they do, and it has made a real difference. Now, you know, I tell them don't have mission creep. So be sure you stay in your lane,
Yes.
right? But if you can do something a little different out here, that what happens is that it will shore up your nonprofit. And I tell people too, and I have people that call me and ask me questions about, oh, should we apply for this grant? Is that within your mission? Is that something that you would do? Or are you just creating something that you think would be good, that then you write a grant for, and then you have to carry it out, which right now, I don't think this is the time to have mission creep. And so just be sure that
Good advice.
that you stay in the lane that you're in. So
Good advice.
yeah, I think so. Well, Ben, this has been fabulous. I know you have another meeting coming up, and we want to be sure that you know, we give people, you know, just a few minutes at the end of this. But like I said, next week, I will send out an email. So if you came today, you'll get an email with a link in it so you can sign up for next week. And next week will be at 9 o'clock on Thursday. As you notice, the times of these that I've had these webinars kind of change a little bit. It's because that we have all of these great people that I'm interviewing that have really busy schedules. And so what we try to do is move it so that it'll work. And then the following week will be the last week. That'll be webinar number 10 that I will have done for free during this time when I was just trying to help. And so what I'm going to do in that last week is, if you missed any of these webinars, I'm going to take the best advice that all of the experts gave us, and I'm going to wrap it up in that last one, so that if you missed any of them, you can go back and watch the video. And if there's things that you say, you know, that's perfect. And so I'm just going to summarize all of that, because we've had just great people. And so, Ben, thank you. Thank you for all you do, for your volunteer work, for AFP Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Thank you for the good work you do at DonorTrends. And if you would put in the text box how people could get a hold of you, in case that, as what we talked about today with DonorTrends, that they're curious about, you know, how you all would help. Because I'll tell you, one of the things Ben did for me was, as a fundraising consultant, we had some clients we were working with, and Ben did a great presentation so that he could kind of help us decide, you know, where are we, and is this a good time for us to be able to use DonorTrends? And again, that's not a sales pitch. It's just Ben is so good about what he does that he is somebody who can answer questions for you. So Ben, thank you. And thank all of you for being here today. And if you have questions for Ben, or if you have questions for me, please let me know, and go out and have a great day, and have fun with fundraising.